Okay, let's talk about something that so many of us are feeling. It's that quiet, nagging stress that saving money, well, it just feels impossible right now. If you feel like you're constantly fighting an uphill battle with your finances, I want you to know you're not imagining it. The data actually shows this is a huge, widespread reality. And the reasons? They go way beyond just skipping your morning latte. So, does this sound familiar to you? You're putting in the hours, you're trying to be responsible, but when you look at your bank account at the end of the month, there's just not much left over. If that's you, you are absolutely not alone. This feeling of just running in place financially, it's pretty much the new normal for a lot of people. And here's the proof. A recent study from Alliance Life found a pretty staggering number, 48%. Almost half of all Americans are heading into this year feeling more financially stressed than they did last year. Think about that. That isn't just a small uptick. That's a massive wave of anxiety washing over the country. And a lot of that stress is zeroed in on one key thing: savings. A full 60% of people say they're uncomfortable with how much, or how little, they have in their emergency fund. When a majority of the population feels this way, it's a pretty clear sign that this isn't just an individual problem, it's a systemic one. So let's get into exactly why this is happening. It really all starts with what we can call the great disconnect. This is the growing chasm between the money that's coming into our bank accounts and the money that's flying right back out just to, live. This is really the absolute core of the issue. So it's really crucial to understand two different ideas here. First, there's the cost of labor. That's what your employer pays you based on the market rate for your skills. But you have to live based on the cost of living, the actual price of groceries, rent, gas, you name it. For years, those two numbers have been drifting further and further apart. And that right there is the root of the problem. And this chart, wow, it just visualizes the pain perfectly. Look at 2021 and 2022. You might have gotten a decent looking raise, maybe 5 or 6%. But because inflation was so incredibly high, most people effectively took a real pay cut. Your purchasing power, what your money could actually buy, shrank. And yeah, 2025 and 2026 are projected to be a tiny bit positive, but it's nowhere near enough to make up for all the ground that was lost. And it gets worse. For the lowest earners in the country, that tiny recovery we just saw, it didn't even reach them. In fact, their real wages actually went down in 2025. This isn't just about falling behind anymore. For so many people, it's actively going backward, which makes even a basic standard of living feel impossible to achieve. So, this wage gap leads us directly to the second major pressure point, what we'll call the fixed cost squeeze. These are the bills you can't negotiate, the things you have to pay for every month that are basically eating our incomes alive. So look at this number, $6,545. That is the average monthly spending for an American household. But where is all that money going? Well, I can tell you it's not on fancy dinners and vacations. The vast majority of it is being eaten up by a handful of massive fixed costs. And this chart breaks down what a lot of analysts are calling the affordability crisis. Let's start with housing. An incredible 65% of households are completely priced out of buying a median-priced home. For the people who do have a mortgage, it's now eating up over 30% of their income. And then you pile on healthcare, which is projected to jump another 7%, way faster than overall inflation. So what does all this mean? It means that the classic 50-30-20 budget rule, well, it's basically broken. You know the one, 50% for needs, 30% for wants, 20% for savings. But when your needs, like your house and your health, are taking up 60, 70, maybe even 80% of your income, finding that 20% for savings isn't a matter of discipline, it's a mathematical impossibility. Now, this constant financial pressure doesn't just mess with your bank account, it actually changes the way your brain works. Let's take a quick look at the science behind all this stress. Scientists have identified something they call the scarcity mindset. It's what happens to your brain when you're constantly aware that you don't have enough of something, like money. Your brain basically goes into survival mode. It focuses all of its energy and attention on the immediate problem at hand, like how to pay the rent this week. And it does that at the expense of literally everything else. And this isn't just some abstract theory. They can actually see this on brain scans. When you're feeling financial scarcity, activity spikes in the part of your brain that handles immediate valuation. It's the part that's basically screaming, is this worth it right now? At the same time, activity goes down in the part of your brain that's responsible for long-term planning and goals. Your brain is literally being rewired to prioritize today over tomorrow. So let's be perfectly clear about this. The difficulty you might have saving for the future when you're under all this financial stress, it is not a failure of willpower. It's not a discipline problem. It is a documented neurological response. The constant mental gymnastics of weighing trade-offs creates what's called a cognitive load that makes planning for the future feel absolutely exhausting. So you've got wages that aren't keeping up, fixed costs that are soaring, and your brain is literally working against your long-term goals. What happens next? Well, for a lot of people, it's the final hurdle, the inescapable cycle of debt. This chart from Bankrate shows the stark reality of it all. For nearly 1 out of every 3 Americans, their high-interest credit card debt is actually higher than their emergency savings. Savings and debt are in this direct tug-of-war for every single spare dollar. And for millions of us, debt is winning. And this isn't hitting everyone equally. Millennials and Gen X are feeling this squeeze the most intensely. Over a third of each of those generations is now carrying more credit card debt than they have in savings. It makes sense. They're right at that point in their lives with huge expenses like buying a home and raising a family, and they are caught in this perfect storm. I want to just let this quote sink in for a second. It argues that what we're all experiencing isn't some accident or just a series of individual bad choices. It is the logical, predictable outcome. When the cost just to survive, housing, healthcare, childcare, eat up a person's entire paycheck, saving isn't hard. It becomes structurally impossible. So, that brings us to the final, really critical question. The entire playbook for personal finance, budgeting, saving, investing, it was all written for a totally different economic reality. If those rules are now obsolete for a huge number of people, it forces us all to ask, what comes next? What new rules and new strategies do we need for a world where, for many, just staying afloat is the primary financial goal?